Hello ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and welcome to Frostpunk, and I decided to start this time with the title screen. Interestingly enough, it says press any key to start, and the recording button on my keyboard doesn't count. I don't know why, but let's get into it. So what is this game? This is a survival city builder, made by the people who made the wonderfully, beautifully depressing, it's a lot of adjectives there, This War of Mine. Yes, 11-Bit Studios. So if you have played This War of Mine, which I featured on the channel a long time ago, you know kind of what to expect. It's going to be dark, there's going to be consequences for your actions, and you're going to be dealing with the sort of psyche and the mentality of people in a big way. So, on the outset, of course, this is set in a steampunk universe. An alternate history where a great winter has come and people have to survive. Or at least that's what the main scenario is, because there are other stories that you can also play. The main story, of course, is A New Home, and that is by far the longest one, which I completed on stream. FYI, if you don't know that I stream, the link is in the description below. But I have played through the main story, and it took about 6 or 7 hours. The others are considerably shorter. The arcs took me about 3 hours, and the refugees took another 3 hours or so. So that's what you've got, and they've got more scenarios coming soon. And all of them affect your starting sort of resources and setting, and has its own story attached to it. So, we're gonna go and jump into A New Home. I don't think we can complete the entire thing in one video, but let's see what happens. Alright, here we go. So this is the basic story. We've left London and are on the search for a new home, as the title says. And you do find a generator, which you'll get to see in just a moment, and it's frozen solid and abandoned. Why is no one here? Did any of your people survive the blizzard? Are there any others out there? But the main objective is we have to survive. So let's get straight into it, and lovely, lovely fade in here. I will say there is a slight issue with the frame rate that seems to be exacerbated by me recording. So if you do see a low frame rate, it's likely that it's due to the recording more so than the actual game. The game itself runs mostly okay. I have had some issues with loading one of the opening cinematic, which I always skip. It seems to stutter because it's supposed to be hiding a loading screen, and I don't think it works that well. So, recommendation if you want to play this and you want to see the whole like cinematic and everything, run it on an SSD and not a standard hard drive for now. I hope they patch that and improve the performance of the game as we go along, but yeah, just a tip there. So, first things first, stockpile some coal and start the generator. Let's go. We've got 80 people, and they're all homeless. And as you can see here, there's our population counter at the bottom right. And let me just pause it. Space to pause. Very useful, that. So we've got 65 out of 80. That's the number of people that can currently work, because 15 of them are children who can't currently work. So the way that we go about doing this, or at least how I like to do it anyway, is we look around. You can see there's some loose resources lying about, which we can go and gather. Interestingly, even though it's paused, every time you move the camera, the snow moves. I don't know why it does that, but it sort of freezes again after that, which is quite interesting. The game is aesthetically really pretty. There's a lot of little additions which help with immersion in a really big way. For example, if I zoom all the way in, all of the icons disappear. You can actually see all of the people. This is as far as you can zoom in, but you can really appreciate the little details of everything. And you can also hear the people talking sometimes, which is interesting. The other thing as well is that as it gets colder, and it will get colder, as you can see here, it's already going to drop 2 levels, which means it'll go from minus 20 degrees Celsius to minus 40. You can actually change that to Fahrenheit if you wish, if you're some sort of monster, but otherwise, yes, it's in Celsius, or centigrade. And, yeah, you can see at the edges of the screen, there's this little, I don't know if you can pick this up on YouTube. I hope you can, but there's this little freezing effect that's going on, and that thickens as it goes along. I normally hate that on cameras, just as an FYI. I normally hate that the thing when it does that, because it feels really restrictive and enclosed. But in this case, it really adds to the atmosphere of the game, and I quite like that. Also, if you zoom all the way up, the wind noise gets louder, which I think is a nice little effect. Okay, so yes, this is very much like Banished, people will starve and die if you don't help them. So this is the labor screen, and you can increase or decrease the number of workers. It will show you how many of each resource you'll get per hour. Now, it doesn't matter if the people go there and take it and come back with it. It doesn't matter anything about that. These will just be numerical values. It'll just tick along accordingly, so you don't have to worry about pathfinding. You do have to worry about it when they go and get food, which is another thing, because they do individually have to do that, which is a little bit annoying, but it does happen. Right, so let's unpause that, and I'm going to assign people to wood, because we need wood for construction, and to start the generator, of course, we need our coal, so I'm going to send people to do that as well. Now, this is steel. Steel is the other resource that you have here, and it's used for advanced buildings and research, so it is quite useful to get. You don't need it so much early on, but you will need a lot of it later on. So you might be thinking, okay, so these are the sort of loose resources that you have. Well, what do you do after that then? Well, there are other resources in the world. For example, this over here, which just looks like a bit of the wall, which I didn't see at first, was, it's an iron ore deposit, and if you build a steelworks here, you get a huge amount of resources from that. It basically will never run out. And the same goes for this coal deposit here. You build a mine, and I believe there's another one. It's quite hard to see it. I could actually show you with the building overlay, so we'll go. Yeah, you can see the little highlighted areas. These squares are where you build some of those advanced resource gathering. You can actually rotate the camera, and you can actually see this is where you build an outpost depot, and this is where you build a wall drill, which is an advanced building that you'll get, which helps you to drill frozen wood out of the walls, because who knew they were there. So, yeah, building placement is quite important, because you really don't want any of those little gaps. So I like to start off with this. And, let's see where else can place that. I think we can place that one there. So, we don't have quite enough to build all of the houses just yet. Some people are going to still stay homeless. And any free workers that you have that aren't assigned to anything will go and build those. There is also a schedule, so you can see the time as it ticks along. During work time, all people will go to their assigned workplaces, but after that, it's free time. They can do whatever they want, and that usually means any buildings that you have left over will nicely be completed, because you have the full force of your population to actually work on that. So, it's quite a nice system there. There's a nice balance there, and you can, of course, modify that later on. So, first things first, let's turn on the generator. We've got enough coal. And you can see it has various levels, and you'll see how much that actually affects. So, right now at level 1, most of these places, I believe once the tents are actually up, they will have some sort of insulation, so they will be comfortable to live in. You can actually see the different levels here. There we go. So you can actually see there, that is now comfortable to live in. Tents don't provide any insulation, which is another thing that you'll get onto later on. So the balance here is that you want to have the steam level high enough that it provides a sort of comfortable level, and then you'll want insulation for everything else that can't reach that. So because these themselves don't have any insulation at all, well, they have level 1 level of insulation, so that's giving it +1. Everything goes up in sort of an individual increment like that, so you don't have to worry about the individual temperatures necessarily, it's just more zones. So if you research insulation or you get better housing, they will be kept 1 level above the actual current temperature. So if it's -20, these guys I believe are at -10. So at the moment it completely prevents them from getting sick, but later on it will become a problem when there simply isn't, or when it's simply too cold. So yeah, managing the temperature is quite important there. So I want to finish off building some of these houses. They're going to need them soon. Each building will house 10 people, and that pretty much stays that way. Now you do want to have some excess housing, I find, just so any new people that join your colony can survive. In a lot of ways, this is a lot like Banished, a little bit like RimWorld as well, just in overall kind of theme and style, but there are some slight differences. The main differences being this is the Book of Laws. At the moment, because it's early game, we only have adaptation. And these are the laws that are available to you. And you can see immediately there is something that's a bit questionable. That is child labor. You can actually assign children to work. At the beginning, this seems like a good idea, but it is one of those short-term solutions that doesn't really solve anything later on, and it has some pretty dire consequences. That said, though, safe jobs mean that they will be mostly kept near the city areas. Things like coal piles, chipping away at that, or thereabouts. It's mostly safe stuff. Working at cookhouses and so on. Stuff that won't end up in too many accidents. But of course you can later on get all jobs, which means you can send children into the coal mines if you're an absolute monster. So what I've decided we can do is child shelters, because this is a branching path. If I choose one, it locks out the other. And if I choose child labor, it branches off to this. This now becomes completely locked off to me. So what I could do is get child shelters, and then we can have them be employed as medic apprentices or engineer apprentices. So you do want to kind of plan ahead a little bit when it comes to stuff like this. And the same goes for our medical treatment laws. We have radical treatment, which means if people get gravely ill, you can save them, and that means they won't take up space in the medical posts. However, it also means that the number of amputations you do could rise significantly. They do say that, you know, you may have 30% of the gravely ill be left as amputees. I've not noticed that statistic to be, strictly speaking, true. But that being said, yes, they will be disabled, but at least they won't be taking up space in the medical post, so it's a trade-off. The alternative to that, of course, is to sustain life, so you can't help them, but you will keep them alive as long as possible, so they won't die, but they won't be treated either until you get better medical treatment areas. So the infirmary and so on that you get later on will be able to treat them, but you can't treat them immediately, which means you may end up needing to overcrowd your medical facilities or build more of them, so there is that. But I will point out something about the law system, is that all of these are completely optional. You never have to pass any of these laws. Some of these are always going to have negatives, like the soup law. It is going to make people less happy, but it does mean you get more food out of it. And you don't ever have to pass any of these if you can sustain everything. The one that I would say is definitely a must-have is this. It's either corpse disposal or cemetery, because people die and dead bodies lying around do cause illnesses. So there is that. There are some things that are more or less required. For now, I'm just going to go with the child shelters, and that will allow me to build a shelter. And the shelter will raise hope, because people will then be able to have their children stay somewhere instead of going to work and worrying about their kids. So I think I can place it this way. You can rotate buildings, and that's quite useful. I'm going to place it over here. I'm just wondering if I haven't built that street correctly. So these streets, all buildings need to be connected by streets. That is quite important. Let's see, I might not have built that correctly. They also provide the ability to connect certain buildings. Some buildings can be placed only on streets, and therefore having the streets where you need them is important. But they do use up wood, so you want to kind of be sparing about it. So right now, of course, everyone's just kind of gathering the basic materials. We're getting the rest of the houses built. I think we have just enough. Yeah, we've got 40 homeless, and there are 4 buildings going up. And then, of course, the child shelter, which is where all the children will live. So yeah, during the day they all go there. It's sort of like a children's daycare. In fact, that's probably the closest thing you can get to it. Now, there's the food system as well. Managing hunger becomes a big deal. Raw food is edible, but it makes people very unhappy. So you want to convert it into food rations, which you can do so using the food tab over here and the cookhouse. So these have to be kept at a certain temperature to continue working. So if they get too cold, they will simply stop functioning, and that's a very big problem if you want to have food being made. Now, I will say getting food early on is a bit of a difficult one to do, so bear in mind that's the thing. The other thing that we need to go and build is also a workshop, but we don't have enough wood for that, and it's the end of the day, so we're not going to get anything for now. So managing the people as well as managing their time. You have to remember that people only work when the shift is on, but you can get laws over here to help extend that. You can get the emergency shift, which makes people work for 24 hours. People can die during emergency shifts as well, and it raises discontent quite badly. Extended shift just gives them 2 extra working hours a day, so they start earlier and end later. It's sort of the same as the emergency shift, but it works slower, and it's a bit more manageable. Usually people don't really complain too much about that until later on. But these are the 2 meters. So discontent and hope, if discontent rises all the way to the maximum, you get riots and people calling for you to be removed from power. And hope, if it falls too far, people may also kick you out. And there are many, many different endings for all of this. So it's kind of worth managing all of that. There are some modifiers that will happen, though. And that's something that you can't really change. Which are mostly scenario-based, but we'll get onto that. Right, so it's the end of the first day. We're going on to day 2. And there isn't a hell of a lot left to do other than just make sure we're nicely set up and making food for people. They aren't going to start getting hungry yet, but it is definitely a concern. So it puts people on the cookhouse, and then I will probably just skip forward until the city is a little more developed. Alright, so, this is one of the many little pop-ups you'll get. They're sort of like mobile game style pop-ups that come up from time to time. You don't have to click every single one, and they will time out eventually. But they do give you a little insight into things happening right here, and they do have some effects, and some of them will be choices that you have to make. So in this case, they're simply thanking us for building a child shelter, and you can see the effect there. It says hope will rise slightly. So, you know, there are little things like that, but these are the sorts of things that I really draw the comparison to this war of mine about, because while that very subtly hinted at certain things, and of course you didn't really see the full effects of things until the very end, in this they are very keen to remind you of the effects of your actions very, very quickly. So, for example, when I did the child labor law, I ended up with a disgruntled parent telling me that they refused to allow their children to go and work in dangerous workplaces, which is completely understandable, but at the same time, you have to choose then whether or not you want to allow them to stay at home, or whether you force them to go to work. That is a tricky choice, and it gets more difficult than that. Right, skipping ahead again. Okay, so now that we've got a workshop set up, this is where you do your research. And you really do want to do this very quickly, because a lot of the important adaptations you need are all here. This is the full tech tree. Some of the scenarios have a sort of truncated tech tree, where, you know, some things are removed or some things are researched for you and so on. This is the basic tech tree that you will see the entire game. So, a lot of the stuff here you can see very quickly. There's some very interesting things, like automatons, which are basically giant robot spiders. But there are also other things like better houses, for example, and housing insulation, which definitely becomes quite useful. And of course things like upgrading the generator to provide more heating, increasing its range, individual heaters for buildings. There is a lot to research here, and a lot of this becomes very useful very quickly. But the one that we're most interested in right now is the beacon, because this allows you to send out scouts, which is a big part of the game. And in fact, if you're a big sucker for story, this also adds a lot to that. And it is one of the objectives that you have to do for the scenario, so there's no way of getting around it. But just know that getting a beacon early and getting scouts out is quite important, so we want to start researching that as soon as possible. Alright, now we've got a little update here that wood crates have been depleted. That means this over here is depleted, and those people have been unassigned from work. So we can, of course, reassign them to another one. We still need wood for now, so I'm going to put them onto the other one. You might notice that these trees are being highlighted as well, and that's because you can build a sawmill, and the sawmill will basically harvest all of those trees in range. Now, there is something that I haven't mentioned yet, which is the gathering post. So you see, this is a building that you can place down. You can assign 15, I think it's 15 or 10 workers to it, and they will gather all resources in range. They don't do it as fast, but it allows you to gather multiple resources for less labor. It is a bit more efficient, but it is slower. And it does cost you steel to build this building, so use it sparingly. I personally don't really use them until much later on, so it's up to you if you want to do that. I have had a playthrough where I did do gathering posts early, and it was about the same, so give or take, you could go well with it, or you might find it to be not as useful. Right, so now that we're completely out of raw food, I can unassign all of the workers there, I can switch off the cookhouse, and that will be just left dormant until we have food again. And I do want to research something soon enough. Interestingly, even though we're researching something, you can actually see that happening there. Because the tutorial hasn't popped up yet for us to actually do the beacon, the research button hasn't actually appeared yet. So there are some things that the game designers or game developers hadn't really considered you would do early. And basically every time I play this, I've had this issue as well. But there is a research button that appears here and shows your progress, and it just hasn't appeared yet because, yeah. We're moving too fast for the game. Anyway, let's move along and see what happens next. Alright, so we got ourselves a beacon, or as I call it, the bacon. And this is a building that doesn't need heating. Some of these buildings that you actually get, they're not inhabited by people normally, so they don't actually ever need heating. So you can place this really, really far away and it'll be perfectly fine. So in this case, I'm just going to drop it here. It does mean that, yes, I will have to spend extra wood to build a street all the way down to it, but it's not a big deal. It's... yeah, it's fine. Obviously you may do this slightly differently, but there we go. Alright, so we finally got a second objective, which is to build a cookhouse, and we've kind of already done that. But we do need to build something else, and that is the Hunter's Hut. This is another one of those buildings that doesn't need heating. So I'm just gonna pop it down there instead. I might actually build another one as well. Just preparation for the future, because the Hunter's Huts don't produce much until they're upgraded, so you may actually find yourself running out of food very quickly if you don't nip that in the bud very quickly. Alright, so there's the beacon, and here we go. Nice little cutscene. Fades in. I actually really like that fade in, it's very nicely done, and the cutscenes have this like vignette around it, which is really, really nice. But that is the beacon. It's basically a hot air balloon, and it serves two purposes. It means people can find you, and you can find them, which is exactly what we are going to do. And happily, the game does give you enough people to actually form scouting parties. So you can actually see this is the entirety of the Frostland, and it is huge. And interestingly, this view changes depending on the temperature and the time of day. There is a huge amount of detail that's been put into this game. It's absolutely beautiful for it. Right, so we're going to... hang on, game, I'm explaining things. Okay, so I'm going to put people there. I'm going to take people off that. I'm going to put 10 people there. In fact, I'm going to put the engineers on there. Engineers are a different class of people. They do some specialized jobs like the workshop and the medical facilities, which is different. Right, so there we go. That's just me telling me that people are ready to go scouting, which we're going to do. So you require 5 workers. Engineers can't be sent out to do that, just as a heads up. So 5 workers and 40 wood, which we have. So I'm going to send them out, and you can actually have a look. So we've got the Lost Expedition and the Crash Site. So these are probably from the convoy when we were coming in, and we can send them over to the Lost Expedition. I think there's probably going to be... yeah, so you can actually see a brief description here. So they're the lost members of the expedition, which we've left behind, which means we're going to have more people coming in, which is where we'll probably want to have more tents built. Probably. I do like to kind of build backwards like this, so that things are kind of... yeah. I don't know what else to say about that other than it's just neater. You don't want unnecessary gaps, and I have made one with this street over here, which I'm thinking of actually removing. But we shall see. Right. Okay, interesting thing about this game, I'm just going to pause it here so that you can actually see that. It says there are 3 sick people. This similar thing happens with hunger. It'll tell you how many hungry people there are. In brackets, it will also tell you, and it will also come up with a second number underneath. So you'll see 2 numbers. You'll see like 3 and 1, which will show how many are sick and how many are gravely sick. And for food, it will show you hungry and starving. So gravely ill and starving are the critical ones, where people are going to actually die from it. And that's where you kind of need to step in and do something. Thing is, though, we have a medical post. And they are capable of housing 5 people. So you might be wondering, why are there 3 sick people and there's empty places at the medical post? That's because these 3 people are at work right now. So they will only go to... Oh, sorry, it's actually free time right now. So they'll only go to it during the day. Meaning they only do anything when it's work shift time. Which is an odd way to think about it, but basically in the morning when everyone goes to work, they will report to the medical post and get healed up. They won't go there during the night. The other thing is, for food, they go there at the end of the work shift. So there's these sort of timings that you have to play by. They basically go to medical posts only in the morning at the start of a shift, and they go and get food at the end. So when you see these sorts of things at any other time, it's probably not something you need to actually worry about. It's not crucial until it actually becomes a thing. But yeah, it's normal to panic when you see stuff like that, but it's not really an issue. So yeah, and you can actually see the number of people as well. These guys are going on an expedition, so they're actually the scouts that we've sent out. So they're not going to be back for a little while, and they are quite sick. That's not good. Well, nothing I can do about that. Let's just move on. Now, there's something I want to mention as well about the time control. So you've got the fast game speed, which is that, ticks over slightly faster, and then you've got the super fast game speed, which works just like the thing in The Sims. You can actually see it went back to normal speed. So every time the schedule changes, 7 AM is where the temperature changes happen, which just happened. 5 AM is when people wake up, and 8 AM is when they start work. So at any point, if it hits one of those events, it will go back to normal speed, and then you can speed it up again. I don't know if there's an option to change that. There might be, but typically you don't really have to worry about that so much. It's just that it kind of pauses it so you can have a look around before the workday begins and then choose to skip along if you want to. Now, we can enact a new law. There's a cooldown on all of these laws. So, for example, the child shelter one gives you 18 hours. The next one after that is 1 day and 12 hours. I believe the more advanced the law is, the longer it takes between them. So we don't really have to pass anything just yet. There's not really much to worry about just now. We could go with emergency shift. But every law you pass has an immediate effect as well, and this one will raise discontent, and that's not something that we really need to worry about so much right now. I mean, they're a little cold, but that's about it. You can actually have a look at the temperature overlay, and you can see there are people cold. And if we don't fix this soon, if it continues for the next couple of days, the medical post is going to be overrun with patients. So what we can do to temporarily fix this problem, we can turn generator overdrive on, which will increase the temperature of its operating radius by 1 level. It also affects the temperatures of something called a steam hub, which we are currently researching, which is like a secondary outlet for the generator. It will cause it to use a little more coal, but it allows you to designate heating zones, which the residential areas definitely do need. So we're going to just speed things along until we get that. Oh, the scouts are at the location. So yeah, you get a little notification when they've reached the spot, and you can go and choose to do what you want. So in this case, it's a lost expedition. We can explore the area, and it gives you an insight into what you might get from there. So we might get some survivors from there. And here we are. So it gives us a few more places to go and check out. And we can choose to either escort the survivors back to the city, which means they will reach back to the city a lot faster. but it will also be safer for them, or we can choose to send them on their own. It'll take longer, and some of them may even die on the way. So in this case, it's probably better if we just escort them back. I think that'll be fine. And it's only going to take us 5 hours. So if they've already visited a place, they've trekked the location there, you'll get this little notification here where it's a known route, and they actually travel, I believe it's 2 times faster, because it did take them 10 hours to get there to begin with. It's only going to take 5.5 to get back. So it is significantly faster if they've been that way before. So it definitely is beneficial to send your scouts back with the survivors. You can always send them back out again after that. Right, the steam hubs have just been finished as well. We need a little bit of steel to get that going. So what I might actually do in that case is reprioritize some of the people over here onto steel. We've got people getting frostbites as well, so we can see there's 4 gravely ill, and they're going to be taking up space in the medical post as well. We do need to pass a law regarding that, so I'm going to, in this case, go for radical treatment. So they will be left as amputees, but there's a chance they may recover as well. So yes, there's people getting frostbite, and that means they will actually get treated at the medical post, which is a good short-term solution, prevents you from getting needing to upgrade your medical post too early on. But it does mean that you will need to care for the amputees later on. Alright, so very first thing I want to get here is something called a coal thumper. Now you can see there's a lot of buildings and stuff to build. I'm not going to go into detail about each one. If you do want to check out a proper playthrough of this, do feel free to come by the streams when I'm streaming that, because that's probably the better place to see the whole game in its entirety. But yeah, very difficult to condense the whole lot down into a video, unfortunately. But I shall try my best. Again, I don't think we can actually complete the entire scenario in this video, but I'll see what I can do. One thing that is good is that we're getting 22 workers and 10 engineers out of this. That's quite a lot. I can immediately assign them to food because we are going to need to feed more people. And I do need people to start working on rations again, because we are going to run out if we're not careful. And the survivors are back, so that means we get a little cutscene for these guys. And there we are. So reunions, we've brought families back together, and it's all quite nice and warm, or heartwarming. It's still not warm, it's far from warm right now. I'm going to check out the crash site as well. So it's going to take 14 hours for them to get there. And I think now we can assign people to do that. Our people found a trail leading into the wilderness. We should follow it. We must find other people and ask them for help to secure survival. There's an idea. We have to find another settlement. It's an important thing. And we can turn the cookhouse back on, so that will allow us to do a thing. Now I have left the generator on overdrive, and this bar here is filling up. This is the stress level. You will get a warning when this reaches too high, but of course if you let it reach 100%, the generator will just explode. And that is game over for everybody. So you really don't want to have that happen. So I'm going to build a steam hub here as well so that we can keep people warm. It is a bit of a waste putting it this close to the generator, but for now this will do. We can always move buildings later on, so that is something we can do. Thankfully I won't have to keep the generator on overdrive for much longer, so you can actually see the effect of that now is everybody's in sort of livable conditions now. And it does mean I can build houses at the back there, which I'm going to have to do because we have more people now. Again, tents aren't great, but that's all we have right now. And you will notice as well that the coal consumption increases with each temperature level. So while overdrive itself doesn't increase coal consumption, generally speaking. The number of Steam hubs and the level that you're running it at will. And that's something that you really do need to be very careful of. Alright, the scouts have reached the new area, we can explore that. And that's quite useful, it's going to bring in raw food and wood, so... Very, very nice there. 46 raw food will convert into roughly... well, it's just multiply it by 4. That's basically how you do that. And the wood is quite useful, so there's a very good sort of starting resources. We can continue scouting on. The scouts will carry that with them, but I choose to bring them back as quickly as possible. Just because they will end up carrying way too much for you to even store at times. You can increase the storage capacity of all your resources by building a resource depot, but those tend to be quite expensive after a while, so you do want to kind of not do that for too long. Alright, so we're going to turn off the overdrive. People are going to start feeling the cold again, which is a bit unfortunate, but it won't be for too long, thankfully, so I think we'll be fine. We've got a coal pile that's just run out as well, so I need to reassign people to that. And I'm also going to build another medical post, because as much as I don't like putting too many of these down, one just simply isn't enough unless we pass a law for that. Alright, so we've got the coal thumper now. I do want to start researching sawmills as well. So the main thing is all of the loose resources will run out very, very quickly. We can actually see that we've run out of the wood crates over here as well. So it does become a problem that you do need to solve very quickly. Alright, so we've had somebody die as the first death here, so we need a way to dispose of the body. We can sign a law for that, so we can go with the cemeteries, which it does reduce the efficiency of your city. Or you can go with corpse disposal, which is more efficient, but people obviously and understandably aren't happy with that. But this will help people, basically people lose hope less when people die. Meaning this becomes quite useless if you manage to keep a lot of people alive, but if people start dying, at least it won't affect your colony as much. Whereas this, well, it's the exact opposite of that. And it does mean, though, that if you have a lot of people dying, then it can be used to improve other things. You can see one right there, which is organ transplants. It actually only helps if people die to help the others live. So, dire consequences for one, but if you are more efficiency-minded, this makes a little bit more sense. You absolute monster. So, we're going to send the scouts back out again. Alright, so I'm going to skip ahead again, this time quite far, and as I have been doing so far, if I've remembered to do so, I will be putting a time-lapse of everything. So I'm not going to be cutting immediately, so you get to see a nice little sped-up version of the... I don't even know why I'm saying this. But yes, I will be... Alright, so I'm just going to skip ahead all the way to the next bit, and it's going to be quite far down, just so you can see exactly how the game will develop. So enjoy! Alright, so I've just sort of paused it here for just a little thing as well as something that you can get. You do get a free one in the scenario, and it's an automaton. It's, like I said, it's a giant walking spider. Or giant robot spider. I think about it, most spiders do walk, actually. I mean, if they if they could fly, they'd be a hell of a lot more terrifying than they already are. But yes, giant mechanical spiders that they can basically just wait for it to actually pop in. They do sort of just come out of the snow. There we go. So you can assign them to somewhere. For example, I can put the automaton here, and it'll work at 60% efficiency initially, but it does work for a full 24 hours. So arguably, it's a bit better than people are. You can build these. They're a little bit expensive to build initially, but the fact that they can replace an entire work crew is kind of amazing. But I feel like using them for the steelworks is a little bit of a pointless endeavor. However, I can assign them to that, because that will replace all 15 people at the same efficiency, which is kind of amazing. So they do have their uses, for sure. But the main advantage is that while they do use up coal to fuel themselves, they are capable of working 24 hours. So that's the trade-off. And it's quite a good trade-off if you're short on people, which we're not at the moment. We really aren't short on people right now, but we might become short on people later, and that's another thing for later me to go and figure out. But you can see the city has kind of expanded a little bit. We have some cold homes, and I'm looking to probably fix that as soon as possible. But we're not going to be doing that overnight, so I'm just going to speed things up, and we'll see how we get on. As will always happen with every time you play the scenario, is the other settlement known as Winterhome has been found abandoned. And people came here expecting to find another city that had made it, and pinning all their hopes on this other city that had survived. And as it turns out, they failed to survive, even in what could be considered milder conditions than we're facing right now. So, yeah, understandably, people are not exactly too happy with the news. But this marks a turning point in the scenario, and sort of the midpoint of it, as you now have to give them some form of purpose. And that gives you access to two very, very different paths. Now, these will dictate the way you play. And remember I said that some laws are optional. This is especially true of the purpose trees. So you can go the path of order and discipline, which means a more heavy-handed governmental role, or you can go the path of faith and attempt to inspire the people back to hope instead. So very, very different ways of going about it. On one hand, order might make them feel safe, make them feel like they have a sense of guidance and purpose, or faith might give them the hope they find within themselves, perhaps. It's very different paths you have to choose, and all of these have even more dire consequences than just the adaptation tree would allow. So, for the purpose of this one, I'm going to go down the faith tree so I can show you what is there. If you want to see the order tree, I'm sure I'll do it on stream at some point, but it is a little bit difficult to show both of them in a single playthrough, so bear with me on that. So we're going to go down the faith tree so I can explain exactly how the purpose tree works. So you get a very simple law to pass very early on, and you're only able to see the next one above that. Now, if I build a house of prayer, it's just a simple place for them to seek solace and guidance. But there is no further intervention from there, and it is purely the volition of the people to actually go about doing that. And the effect of such a building is that when placing it, you will notice it has a sort of area of effect. And people living near a house of prayer will definitely benefit from such a thing. So I could choose to place it somewhere at the back here. See if we can affect the most amount of people possible. That seems to be a good spot right there. It does take up space, yes, but the more people living near one, and I could actually build another one just to kind of reach everybody. I think that's good. The inner sphere here doesn't seem to really get one, so why not? Just for the purpose of this, I'm just going to build that. So you can see the effect is now covering every single one of these tents. And of course, there is the separation. So in this case, you also have to fight a separatist group that wishes to return to London, convinced that this is a suicide mission and going back is their only option. And so now you get the Londoners. And in 15 days they will leave. There is a total of 19 of them, and if you don't raise hope to a satisfactory level, then more people will join them. So the way to go about doing this, we have 80 people currently living near houses of prayer, which is not the entire population. And you do want to kind of raise that as much as possible. There we go. So hope rises now. We've got 150 people living near one, and now all of them should be living near one, or, well, most of them, anyway. And that does give them some hope. We can also do a sermon, which is a active ability with 2 days of cooldown. And, oh, I forgot I was doing that. Yes, because there were hungry people who hadn't gone and eaten yet, so that didn't quite work. But the effect of these sermons will give them a little bit more hope. We've also got our scouts still out there, and they found a outpost, which they can make use of. This is a completely separate thing. So outposts, if you set up an outpost there, they will the teams will bring back a certain amount per day, which is quite useful. But we're not really able to do that just yet. And overall, I think this is pretty much the game. Without showing the entirety of it. It does branch out even more, and eventually you reach an ultimate point on the purpose tree. In this case, it's the new faith, which goes to all the way to the extreme end of faith. And order also has the new order, which is the extreme end of that too. So having some of these helps, but going too far into it can have consequences. So it is entirely up to you how far you want to go down each way. You can go without any of this if you so choose, but ultimately there is a price to pay for each thing, and all I can say is this tree will eventually let yourself effectively crown yourself the new pope, which is a very extreme decision, but in dire times that may actually be useful. But just know that not every decision you make will be a popular one. But that is pretty much where I'm going to leave it, as the generator very quickly... It does actually tell you that when you're low on coal and how quickly that will run out. So that is something to watch out for. I do actually want to put the robot onto that instead, so I'm going to take him off of wood, because we don't really need that yet. I'm going to put the robot on that, so we get some coal coming in overnight, and of course the generator shuts down now, which means people will freeze overnight, and they may eventually start dying, which is another concern. But all in all, that is Frostpunk. This is just 1 out of 3 current scenarios in total, and there are still more to come, and I'm hoping for Steam Workshop support to come for this as well, so we can have our own custom scenarios being added to the game all the time, because this is an absolutely beautiful game. I absolutely adore the aesthetic of this game, and the just sheer amount of little bits of detail that you get out of this. For example, there are buildings that if you build them close together, they actually start to connect with each other. Yeah. The generator itself has a visual upgrade every level you go up, And yeah, everything just, it looks alive, it looks real, it looks like it belongs. And if that doesn't convince you enough, then maybe if I... Well, I was gonna say if I could turn the generator back on, you can actually see just the heat coming off of that. There's a little bit of tilt shift effect going on when you zoom in. But the smoke looks like something out of an animated movie. It looks absolutely gorgeous, especially under the heat there. But yes, it is a beautiful game, and the choices you have to make, the gravity of every single situation you find yourself in. You may have seen some of them flash up earlier when I was speeding through it. I didn't want to really spoil anything, so I just kind of left that bit sped up. But just know that some of those were choices that I had to make, and some of them had pretty serious consequences. So bear in mind, this is not going to be an easy game to get through on that front. But yeah, if you loved the way that this War of Mine tugged at the heartstrings every time you had to make a decision, and if you loved the tricky balance of games like Banished, then this is an absolute must-buy for any of you. Ooh, I can turn the generator back on! Look at the Steam! And speaking of Steam, this game is now available on Steam for, I believe it's something like $30 or your regional equivalent. It might be something less than that. I haven't actually checked in a while, but yes, it's not the most expensive game out there, but it has heart, and that is something you don't get too often nowadays in games. So I really, really adore this game. But that is a hearty recommendation from me. And I hope you guys enjoyed watching the video. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Panzer, and I'll see you next time.